In order to grow potatoes, you need to grow them from seed, but not just any seed, potato seed, which looks different. It requires cutting one potato into several chunks where you have at least one eye or sprout on each chunk. This process is called chitting, and it allows you to grow multiple potatoes off of one potato seed. You'll want to do this 2 to 3 weeks before planting your potatoes, and if you have any that are small enough like these, you can plant just those. Set them out in a dry, warm space that is in indirect light.
So when I was in Louisiana, I never chit my potatoes because there it was so humid, it was almost inevitable for them to grow mold and rot. And while most of mine are nice and hard and dry and calloused over, there were some that became moldy and I had to toss into the compost. So the verdict is still out whether or not I believe chitting is the way to go. But for the ones that are good, the callus is nice and hard and clean, and there's still some good eyes that have sprouted. And so now I'm going to be planting my potatoes. Potatoes grow new potatoes from each node along the stem. So this is going to grow some leafy growth, and then in about 6 to 8 weeks, I'm going to want to hill my potatoes to cover up part of that stem, and I can even do that a second time. And so the key to planting these is planting them 4 inches deep and about 6 inches apart, and then as they grow up, hilling over the plants themselves. I'm also going to experiment with my chit potatoes and put all the chit potatoes on this side of the garden and all of my non-chitted potatoes, like this one, on the other side to see what produces more.
When planting a lot of plants like this, I find it is most helpful to place all of them in position first and then dig them in after. In general, it's always a good idea to plant in diagonals. So that way you plant one row and then above 2 plants, you have one in the very center. And so there's always something in sort of a diagonal pattern that's going to increase the amount of space for all of your plants. Potatoes should get about 1 inch of water a week. Usually rainfall alone is enough.
My potatoes are 6 to 8 inches tall, and that means it is time to hill them. Hilling is a term used for layering compost on your potatoes to create a hill-like effect along the stems. And the reason for that is because the potatoes grow new potatoes at the nodes. So wherever there is a branch on the lower parts of these stems, there's potential for more potatoes to grow. So what we're going to do is we're going to use some clean, sterilized pruners to clip the lower leaves, and then we're going to put compost up around the stems. You don't have to clip the leaves. You can do this in any scenario if you're growing them in a raised bed or in a pot or a planter, but the goal is just to remove the lower stems and then hill up soil around those stems. So what I'm doing is I'm looking for that main stem, and then I'm removing all of the lower stems, and I'm not being too picky. It's okay if you get green in there, but I'm just getting off these big guys. So the result are these kind of tall, leggy guys, because the soil will now come up to right here.
The trimmings from the potato plants are not edible, so best for them just to be dumped into the compost. You could easily do this with just one person, but when I had my husband's help, it was really easy because I moved the plants where I wanted the soil, mounded the soil along the root stems of the potatoes, and we continued on. I have about 100 plants in 2 beds that are 3 feet by about 20 feet wide, and we used half a yard of compost for both beds. We are hilling our potatoes a second time. So if you hill your potatoes a first time, you're going to double your yield of potatoes. And if you hill them a second time, that means you're going to triple your yield. This time our plants had gotten so tall, we were less meticulous about removing the lower stems and just covered up as much as we could. We are pulling our potatoes today, and I like them to die all the way back. Hopefully I haven't waited too long. We're about to see what we get. As soon as your plants flop over, you can harvest them. We were going out of town and didn't have the time, so we went ahead and waited. Another thing you want to keep in mind is rainfall. Ideally, you can make a harvest before you're expecting a lot of rain. Here I am just pulling the tops out, placing to the side, and digging up deep to see what we can find. And we ended up with an incredible harvest, at least 2 to 3 times of what we had originally planted. If you find any potatoes with decay or rot, you're going to want to discard those or cut off the bad parts and use them as soon as possible. If you want to store your potatoes for up to 6 months and maybe even longer, how you store them is very important. First and foremost, they need to be stored in an area that is dry and dark and cool. The temperature should ideally not be above 50 degrees. Otherwise, they'll sprout, in which case you could use them for future potato seed. If exposed to light, they'll actually turn green and become toxic. And so a basement or a root cellar is an ideal place to store potatoes. And there's many different ways to how you store them inside. In the past, I've just used cardboard boxes, and I've made sure that my potatoes are nice and spread out evenly in the box so that there is nice aeration. This year, I've upgraded to a couple of different methods. One is a box like this that has holes on the side and is very nice and breathable. And the other is these burlap bags, which is also really nice and breathable and dark. I'm going to store them on this shelving unit, and I'm going to use this tobacco to my advantage to provide further darkness for the potatoes that are stored behind them. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to put a little bit of hay in the bottom of this box. And now...
We put potatoes in?
Yes, but I like to sort out my potatoes by size so it's easy to go back to. So we can do either the largest potatoes in here that you see or the smallest ones that you see.
The biggest.
Okay, let's go with the biggest. And what we need to do is we need to inspect them to make sure that there is no scratches or no soft spots. We don't want to rub off the dirt. We just want to look and see if there's any blemishes or bruises or any rotting. Do you see anything like that? All right, it can go in the box. While you do one, I'm going to do one too. I'll do the smallest ones. You can also use sand or wood shavings or sawdust as a medium to hold them. The whole purpose is that they're not just clustered together and they've got something nice and dry surrounding them. In this room, I'm able to close the shutters on the windows and ensure that it stays completely dark. But if you don't have that and you're afraid that light is going to seep in somehow, you can always throw an extra blanket or towel over whatever storage method you have to make sure that you're keeping the light out. If you follow the rules of cool, dark, and dry, then you can have your potatoes store for at least 6 months or longer. It's important that you occasionally check on them to make sure that no rodents have moved in and found your nice harvest.